The village smithy and his helpers. One in the family, down to the youngest, knew the necessity of making a living. Each knew that the reason for coming to Spring Hill, Kansas, was to give Dad the best advantage possible. But the farm way of growing one's own food was ingrained in them, and they made a very large garden in their yard in the west side and close to the house. Dad spaded the ground in the early mornings before he went to his shop. He turned the deep, rich soil and threw aside dead grass and weeds from the previous summer's growth. Then he leveled the ground and made rows in which he and the children sowed the tiny vegetables and flower seeds. By the end of May, the seedlings, nourished by warm rain and bright sunshine, were growing luxuriously, and what little care was needed could be given by the children. It was now truly their own garden. The landlord had said at the time the house was rented that the produce from the 4 peach trees in the backyard was to belong to Dad. That is, if they produced anything. Dad was not one to give up easily in spite of the landlord's gloomy accounts of the past meager output of the peach trees. He pruned the trees, and soon as blossoms appeared, he began a series of spraying to keep away the vermin. But the main source of income was from Dad's work at the blacksmith shop. On one particular day after school had let out for the summer, Jenny accompanied her father to the shop. They walked across the town in the early morning light, and soon they could see the little shop set in a big yard full of giant farm machinery. There wasn't much horseshoeing to do. Mostly Dad's work consisted of making a new part to replace one that had broken. A huge machine could not function from want of a tiny part. As they neared the one-room farm building, Dad drew out a key, and soon the interior came into view, well illuminated by the windows on all sides. To the rear at the right were the forges in which a fire was soon lit. On the left, in the other part of the store, were shelves piled full of merchandise used on machinery. These articles were for sale, but that was a minute part of the business. The main work was creating and repairing. The growing coals were blown by bellows, and Dad, wearing gloves and heavy leather apron, would hold metal in the heat, and then place it red hot on an anvil, would hammer it into the desired shape. He worked fast and furious because only the hot metal could be worked. Once it was cold, it was set. Customers began to appear and walk around the shop while Dad was busy at the forges. They picked up tubes, jars, and boxes on the shelves, examined them idly, and put them back. Jenny stood by watching intently from the sideline. A man smiled down at her, picked up a tube with some dried-up product in the end, and said, "I think I'll take this." Then he put money in her hand. Soon other customers followed for his example, and Jenny had a handful of money, while customers had purchases nobody could ever use. But Jenny was very happy making money and being of real service to her father. That is, until her father saw what she was doing and told her she was not to take any more money from the customers. It was only a couple of months later, however, that Jenny, along with Newt and Cricket, found out they had a genuine money-making business selling tomatoes from the large garden out by the side of their house. This was phenomenal, huge, and prolific. The townspeople saw his effort as a truck garden and stopped by off, paying handsomely to have their various containers filled with tomatoes. Some tomatoes were yellow, some red, but all were so huge that Jenny could hardly hold them in her small hands in order to put them into sacks and pans. Because Dad was away at work most of the time, the children had the job of selling the vegetables, finding this a most pleasant and profitable occupation during their summer vacation. There was a small grocery store near the blacksmith shop, and in the front of the store, to appeal to customers, was a beautiful glassed-in candy counter. Cricket, Newt, and Jenny took all the money they had one day and hurried to the candy counter. They stood and oogled the luscious candies, debating and discussing the potential purchase. Eventually, they made a small purchase and gave the grocer, who had been partially watching them for some time, and all the money they had brought. "Will you help me clean out my candy counter?" the grocer asked after he made the exchange. "The broken pieces of candy were unattractive, and I would appreciate it if you would help me take them off my hand." He knew what their answer would be, so all the while he was taking out broken candy and sacking them. Then he handed a large sack of candy to the children free of charge and expressed his gratitude for their help. "Come back and help me again," he said, and they did, often. One of Dad's favorite foods in all the world was peaches. And when the landlord told him he could have all the peaches the tree in his yard produced, Dad was thrilled. He saw it as a great opportunity, and all spring and summer he worked, watering, spraying, fertilizing, and pruning. Under his careful nurture developed healthy, beautiful trees, a delight from their early blooms to the later maturing of the colorful, mellow peaches. One Sunday, just when the peaches had turned ripe and hung lusciously and juicy on the trees, the landlord came driving to the front yard in his shiny, big automobile. "I'll be by tomorrow for all my peaches," he called out. Then he drove back down the lane to the street. He had stirred up more than just dust. Dad stood motionless, watching the landlord's car clear out of sight. This was followed by a flurry of activity that belied his previous calm. He gathered baskets, buckets, dishpans, everything that was empty, and went out to the peach tree and started picking peaches. The children joined him in this activity until it was dark, and they went to bed, leaving Dad to work alone all night, except for some help from Leila. All night long, Dad worked, peeling, stoning, cutting up, cooking, and canning peaches. By daylight, he had finished. He took every scrap that had been discarded and all of the canned peaches, and early that morning, the landlord came for his peaches. He took his bushel baskets and went towards the peach trees. As he looked up at the stark, denuded trees, his face froze in astonishment. Only leaves waved in the breeze where the day before had hung a wealth of peaches. He found some pretext to go through and inspect the house, but there was no peaches inside, and nothing to indicate that there ever had been any peaches in the house. His eyes shifted from side to side, but he asked no questions, and in a moment was gone. Dad slumped into a chair where the tension had passed. Ahead was a day's work at the blacksmith shop, and he was tired of working all night. He turned toward Leila, who was standing nearby. "The landlord didn't have any right to them peaches," he said. "He told me when I rented this place that I could have them. He didn't have any right going back on his word." "That's true," Leila agreed. "And if he'd been nice about it, I'd given him some of them. But to think, he come over to get all his peaches. Well, I couldn't let him have them. They haven't been any good," Clarence said, breaking his customary silence. "It was just your working on 'em that made 'em any good this year." "I know. He gave 'em to me because he didn't think they'd be any. If he'd have said they belonged to him, I wouldn't have touched a one," Dad explained, showing a heavy conscience. He rose stiffly and started slowly to go to his blacksmith shop. About this time, Leila got a job working in the household help for the wife of the farmer next door. Soon she was able to offer temporary work there for both Clip and Clarence. Her absence from the home placed a burden on the three younger children who had learned to cook, clean house, and wash dishes. Sometimes after leaving the house in disarray, the children returned to find everything made neat and tidy. Jenny was told the brownies did it, but she strongly suspected it was all done by Leila. She would have been disappointed to find that she had missed a visit from her sister, so the others kept the little falsehood going. For a special treat, Leila occasionally drove her family to the movies in Olaf, a large town some distance away. Here they saw a silent picture, but for a small child like Jenny, who could read only slightly, some of the action was incomprehensible. Leila sometimes took them to the farm where she worked, to the lovely bungalow in the little knoll, with its long line of cattle barns out back. Upstairs in the beautiful white bungalow, where an indoor bathroom and bedroom with round braided rugs set on shiny smooth floors that were so dustless and free of footprint that Jenny guessed the rugs were there to keep people from walking on the floor. With this in mind, she jumped from rug to rug, deciding that if she lived here, the rugs would have to be closer together. In the basement, the clothes were being washed in a big machine. They sent the used water down a hole in the concrete floor. Jenny examined every inch of the farm as much as she was permitted and carried that image with her always. Winter passed soon, and one day when it looked like spring and was almost time for school to let out for the summer, Dad sat down in his chair and gently drew Jenny to his side. "I know you like it here, Jenny," he began as he brushed his hair back from her forehead. "In a way, it's a good place to live, but I never lived anywhere else except in the Ozarks since I was 5 years old, and it always has been home. I know I worked in Kansas City for a few months, but that wasn't home. After your mother died, I thought maybe I'd be able to forget things better if I sold the home place and moved away. I thought I'd be happier someplace else, but I wasn't. I guess you can't run away from a hurt. I've decided to go back home." He pushed and watched her face for some reaction. After a few moments, she asked, "When will we go? Right away?" Fright seized her as she thought of her sister and brothers out on the farm. Would she ever see them again? "Will we all go?" she asked. "You would have liked to have lived out on that big farm, wouldn't you?" he asked. "Oh, yes," she answered, wondering why he asked. "Well, so does Leila. She's going to marry Robert. You remember Robert? And she'll live there from now on. Someday Robert will inherit the farm. I know you'll miss Leila, but it's a fine thing for her. She'll come to visit us from time to time. Clip and Clarence will go back with us. We'll see Leila again before we go, won't we?" Jenny asked. Feeling a jumble of conflicting emotions, she felt pride at Leila's success, resentment at losing her, and a deep loneliness that set the tears stinging in her eyes. "Yes, we'll see her before we go," he said, as he turned aside for a moment's reflection. "It seems like I'm always leaving one of my children somewhere. I promised your mother before she died that I always keep you children together as much as I could." Again he turned to Jenny. "We won't be leaving for a while, but I want us to get back home before school starts in the fall." Jenny walked to the house thinking about all the changes that would soon take place. She wasn't altogether disappointed, for she loved to travel, but she had come to love Spring Hill and her school, and most of all, the wonderful friends she had made in Spring Hill.